Well, Save the Children South Africa is helping pupils affected by the devastating KZN floods. It's providing food, vouchers, clothing, tablets, as well as data to help children learn remotely. It says the recent misfortunes in the province highlight the need to urgently finalise the climate change bill. So for more on this, we're joined now by Save the Children South Africa CEO Steve Miller. Steve, thank you so much for your time this morning. I think more than anything else, as we've been focusing on what's been happening with the KZN floods and the disaster there, a very pertinent issue to that one is how children have been affected. Never mind just having to be physically removed from their homes, losing their homes and their livelihoods. But also the other part of it is the issue of school, as well as the psychological effects of the floods and the devastation it's caused. Just take us through some of the findings on the ground that you and your team have discovered.
Yeah, no, thank you. And, we have to start by acknowledging the tremendously difficult time that the people of KwaZulu-Natal have been through over the last few years. Firstly with COVID, then with the unrest that happened last year, and now with the worst floods in living memory. And people and children have experienced such trauma there. I mean, people have lost everything. We spoke to one of our partners, an ECD practitioner, yesterday. She spoke about losing her 14-year-old daughter and still looking for her 3-month-old baby. So you can imagine what's happening on the ground there. I don't like to use statistics in these types of situations, but maybe just to paint a picture, we know of 450 people who have died, including 57 children. We know around 50,000 people have been displaced, and there's a lot of temporary shelters going up at the moment. And as you reflected on earlier, we've seen about 600 schools have been damaged, and that's affecting around 270,000 learners. So this is a tragedy that's happening right in front of our eyes, and we really should be doing more to address it.
Yeah, and speaking about doing more to address it, perhaps we need to stop taking the effects of climate change that much more seriously. Every time we have these kinds of conferences, and we know that we've seen a lot of conferences when it comes to addressing climate change, it would appear as though it's starting to become that backward conversation. It's the one that we have because it's a tick box, but we don't necessarily have, especially from even first world countries, we don't have active first world countries that are actually taking a position on climate change, because ultimately it's a trickling down effect. We on the continent are feeling it. We in South Africa are feeling it. Some of the conditions that we're facing right now, we have not faced before in our lifetime. And that perhaps even speaks to what is to come should we not actually take decisive action on climate change.
Exactly right. The climate crisis is a child rights crisis. It threatens children's survival, development, education and protection, and we can see it happening right here in front of us in KwaZulu. So you're entirely correct. We have international commitments that South Africa has signed up to. The Paris Agreement, everybody knows about that, but our action on the ground here has been slow and insufficient. The Sustainable Development Goals, there's 2 goals in particular, 13 which is on climate action and 7 on renewable energy. We've just reported as a country in 2021, and we have insufficient progress in both of those areas, as well as the other goals as well. And all of this is interdependent. And what it means for us in real terms, if we look to KwaZulu today, is that the most marginalized people in our society, the most vulnerable children, are the ones that are being affected the hardest by these floods, which we will start to see a lot more of going forward.
Yeah, also when we're speaking about what just the impact of climate change that it's having on the continent and South Africa in general, one wonders, is there political will to actually address it? Because ultimately, many would say that the fat cats and a lot of the sectors of industry were built on the emissions of CO2 gases. With industrialization comes extensive emissions, and one wonders whether or not the political, pockets of society will, by the way, benefit from private sector as well as what they're doing, especially when it comes to mining industries and the like, will actually have the will to make these decisive, decisions and mandates on climate change.
It's so difficult to get that political will. I mean, we see it in all of our work at Save the Children. So, if you look at our Children's Act is essentially about prevention and early intervention. It says, let's deal with these issues before they start to harm children. But in reality, what we see for various reasons is just a response. So something happens and we respond. And you see it now with the floods in KwaZulu. So this is a long-term issue. The climate crisis has been building for decades, and it's getting to a point where we're starting to really see the effects. But what we're doing is putting out fires. We're responding as we will respond now, maybe not adequately, but we're responding in KwaZulu-Natal. We will deal with the issue as it presents itself in front of us, and then we'll go back to how things were before. And the crisis itself, the root causes, have not been dealt with.
You know, Steve, you're dealing here with children that have been displaced and significant trauma that has been, I would think, forever imprinted in any child's mind who's had to endure having to either lose their loved ones in a flood, lose their home, lose their schooling, infrastructure and the like. It begs to question, what kind of a South Africa are we leaving for our children who, in not so long a time, they will be the adults? Will they be alive during the time? Will they be well enough to be alive? What kind of a society are we building if the kids that we have today are traumatized by even some of those effects of climate change?
Yeah, you know, I was in a meeting yesterday with my emergency response team in KwaZulu. I'm sitting in Johannesburg at the moment. And we asked the question, you know, when you're looking at who we're trying to help there, is there much overlap with what happened last year? The unrest are the areas that we saw, you know, heavy rioting in July last year. Are those now also affected by flooding? And the tragic thing is that many of them are. So you can imagine a child that's growing up in that type of environment, which has seen such violence in front of them and now has seen such loss. Perhaps their houses have been taken away. Perhaps they're unable to access schooling. And all of this, especially for the very young children, has such an impact on their trajectory through life. So what they're experiencing now, primarily in this case with the floods due to climate change, is definitely going to leave a legacy, not just for them, let's remember that as well, but for all of us. We are a society, we are all connected. Everything that happens in South Africa, we are either implicated in or we're connected to and affected by it. So what's happening to children in KwaZulu is happening to all of us.
We're going to leave it there. Steve Miller, thank you very much for your time this morning, just shedding some light in terms of those that impact on the KZN floods, especially when it comes to children and the type of South Africa that we're leaving for our children.